Everything webinar. My name is Stephen Williams. I am Smart Grid Northwest's Director of Operations and Marketing. And we have, it looks like, over 200 registrants for today's webinar, and I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. A few quick housekeeping notes. All participants will be in listen-only mode, but we want to capture as many questions as possible from the audience. So we welcome all of you to type your questions in throughout the session. Simply type your questions into the chat box provided by the GoToWebinar platform, and we will address as many of these as possible during the session. Since we have so many people registered, we're going to be vetting these a little bit and trying to kind of consolidate them so that we're not overwhelming the speakers with questions. Also, please note that we'll be recording today's webinar and posting on our website and our YouTube channel later today or tomorrow. Today's session features 8 leading companies working to connect intelligent assets into the energy system. Next month, we have over 30 featured speakers joining us in Portland on May 17th through 19th for the Transactive Energy Systems Conference. Transactive energy involves end-to-end automated communication between generation and distributed assets and aims to optimize power and value across the entire grid. I wholeheartedly believe that we will be hearing a lot more about transactive energy in the next coming years, and this conference is a concerted effort by a large international group of academics and manufacturers to get out ahead of the change that transactive energy is going to be bringing. We want to make sure that it's implemented effectively. So we welcome everybody who's interested in the Internet of Things and transactive energy in general to join us in Portland next month if you can. I'm going to hand the webinar over to Smart Grid Northwest's Executive Director, Bryce Yonker, now, who will be moderating today's session. Bryce?
Thank you, Stephen. Great introduction, and I wanted to welcome everybody to our webinar that we're having today. So our webinar, Connected Everything, What It Means for the Grid, is going to be a 2-part session. We hope everybody's excited about the 2 different angles that we're going to take with our discussion and the diversity of amazing expertise that we have from our speakers today. Before we dive in, I wanted to make sure to recognize some organizations that made today's session possible. 2 of our panelists are from companies Itron and Tendril. Thank you guys for sponsoring and helping make the session possible. We had a number of nonprofits help pass word along to their communities. Maybe some of you joined because of them from well beyond the Northwest here. So Clean Energy Trust, Clean Tech San Diego, Clean Tech Alliance Washington, Northwest Energy Efficiency Council, Northwest Energy Coalition, Clean Texas, amongst others. So thank you all for your support. So for today's agenda, as I had mentioned, we have 2 parts. Our first part is going to focus around platforms for connectivity. We have 4 amazing panelists for that session. And then our second part is going to dive in at connected and responsive applications. So there really will be 2 somewhat separated discussions where we'll have setting the stage, speaker introductions, a moderated conversation, and some questions from the audience amongst those 2 groups of speakers. Speakers from both sessions may stick around, so we may have a little bit of cross-pollination. So as Stephen had mentioned, please type in your chat, your questions in the chat box in the question field of the GoToWebinar platform. Hopefully you've used it before. It's very easy. We'll be moderating, looking at those closely and trying to integrate as many questions from the audience as we possibly can. So feel welcome to dive in and provide us your questions. So I wanted to set the stage a little bit for the discussion. Many of you may have seen this graphic. It's not necessarily a new one. I think it's from around 2010 from our friends over at EPRI. So the old grid, if you will, or in many instances what our grid still looks like in most places here across the world and in North America, essentially has a one-way flow of electrons coming from central generation facilities, feeding down through the transmission and distribution system out to the end users. And that system has served us very well for the last century plus, has been incredibly reliable, allowed us to develop our economies and our way of living. However, what's happening with the infrastructure system in the energy space is that it's significantly developing. You can see that on the left side of this graphic, there's more sources of generation. The ways that we're controlling and monitoring and metering our energy across the system is becoming more prolific. There is now generation that's happening, as we all know, on site or near site to the end-use loads. So now we have two-way flows of both information and electrons. And one of the key things we're going to dive into today is now we have the opportunity for a responsive set of energy resources, both at the central generation facilities and along transmission and distribution systems, but especially as we get to the end-use site. So for today's first session, it's kind of hard to map exactly where these companies play because they have solutions that cut across a number of these locations in the system. But we've got Verizon, of course, with telecommunications, Itron with their metering and other platforms, Tendra helping utilities out, and Blue Color helping commercial and industrial users, amongst others, with their platforms. So I wanted to just plug their graphics in to give everybody a bit of a visual representation that we're covering a diversity of this increased awareness and understanding of what's happening in the system. So you're going to hear from all of these panelists. I'm going to let them each introduce themselves here shortly. Wanted to welcome Joel and Kim and Chris and Arun. Thank you guys for being on our session. So at this point in time, we're going to dive in and bring in our experts. So Arun, I'm going to kick the question off first to you. As everybody on this call I hopefully knows, and certainly I'm well aware, Itron has been a key leader for deploying metering solutions for decades now. Maybe for your opening remarks, can you share a little bit about what your smart metering products and the other solutions that you guys are rolling out in the marketplace, what that really means?
Yes, thanks, Bryce, and good morning to everyone. My name is Arun Sehgal. As Bryce mentioned, I am an advisor to the CTO at Itron, and my primary role really responds around going around the world evangelizing the next generation communications and smart metering technologies, as well as smart grid technologies, and how these lead towards sustainable communities and well-connected smart cities. I want to quickly touch on where we are headed and what we see in the crystal ball of smart metering and connectivity. So I will leave you with 4 primary thoughts to think about. Number one, today in the world where we live, compute power is becoming very affordable. Think of the time when we sent people to moon. The same kind of computing, probably many orders of magnitude more than that, is now available in the palm of our hands. So it'll be, it's almost intuitive for us to think that we should start looking at metering as no longer just a monolithic piece of hardware hanging on the side of the wall, but suddenly a very affordable piece of computing device which can do many other things beyond just measure your energy. So think of it as a piece of electronics, as a piece of a smart meter which could run things like applications to solve future problems. The second thing which is also beginning to happen now is that we've all went through the cycle of learning through how the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth of the world became the de facto standard of connectivity within our homes and within our cars. Why can't we achieve the same level of efficiencies of connectivity among devices which are connecting our grid, whether it's connecting a capacitor bank controller to a voltage sensor, whether it's connecting a smart meter to an electric vehicle, and so on? Why can't we achieve the same level of connectivity as we get with standards-based solutions today? So the world is moving rapidly towards achieving all the efficiencies which we used to get from proprietary systems in the past within standards-based connectivity. The third thing which is becoming very interesting in our world is we are beginning to see that our customers are looking for not only bringing back all the data back and do some post-collection analysis, but really trying to figure out, can we do some keen, interesting analysis to support this next generation of grid formation at the edge. Can a smart meter detect a low voltage and send a message to a cap bank controller nearby to change the tap setting? Can a meter detect an outage and sends a message to the other meters on the transformer saying, hey, are you guys also out, and send a transformer out message, and so on and so forth. So this need to do some localized analyses using peer-to-peer communications is becoming a very interesting dynamic in our world. And we see that we can almost see its use in smart connected cities and smart connected communities over the next couple of years. And I think that finally leads me to the last bullet on this slide. We cannot think about smart metering today in isolation, away from the Internet of Things and away from a smart connected community. Whether it's an electric, gas, water, sensor, if I may use the word, or any other devices which form an integral part of our grid, they're all part of one connected ecosystem and need to be considered as one for us to take the most advantage out of any of these technologies. With that, Bryce, I'll hand over to you back.
Excellent. Thanks for the introduction, Arun. And we know about the diversity of solutions that you guys are working on, so we look forward to your insights as we continue the discussion. Next up, Joel, had a question for you to start to introduce yourself. You know, we all know of Verizon. If we're not on your wireless platform, certainly we've interacted with it. And wanted to have you tell us a little bit about the role that Verizon is playing in the connected and smart infrastructure space, and what your solutions are really meaning, both for the utilities as well as end users in the system.
Perfect, perfect. First, let me just say, Bryce, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a pleasure to speak with everyone this morning. And, you know, IoT, and I'm going to use that term loosely here, but IoT is incredibly important to Verizon. I think it was music to my ears that our brand has is so well recognized. I appreciate that very much. I think that when we talk, or when most people think about who Verizon is as a company, generally speaking, they think of our mass marketing or consumer marketing campaigns centered around cell phones. And if you have spent any time on the East Coast, also we have landline offer, cable TV, as well as some Fios offers, right? That's generally speaking where people tend to focus from a Verizon perspective. IoT is incredibly important to Verizon. We have, over the last 10 years or so, made a series of acquisitions to position ourselves, I would argue, relatively uniquely inside of the Internet of Things, or connected assets, connected sensor space. 10 years ago, we purchased an MPLS network. We obviously have an RF cellular network. We also made some acquisitions inside of the cybersecurity space, as well as cloud. And so flash forward to where we are at today, and we are able now to transport data from a sensor, whether it's a meter or whatever sensor that we're talking about that's deployed out in the field, have it traverse our RF cellular infrastructure, funnel it into an MPLS cloud, into a data center, and at the end of the day, from stem to stern, we are able to offer that service without having to use the public infrastructure at all, which obviously from a security perspective is very unique in the market space, right? So with that, and given that, Verizon recently has launched a very targeted and strategic organization within, focusing specifically on IoT. We are picking various different industries. We have several product lines that are centering on the shared economy, several product lines centering on healthcare type of solutions, and as well as agricultural solutions. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, I think what we'll most likely be talking about are our product lines that are specifically centric on grid modernization as well as smart city. I think that as the next and anticipated evolution of where we're going from a grid perspective is into a complete redesign and a review of how cities effectively communicate in order to work best with the next generation as well as the citizens that are living there. So just a quick idea about who Verizon is and what we're doing inside of the IoT or connected sensor space.
Thanks, Joel. Great introduction. So we'll, of course, be coming back to you as well as we dive into the conversation. Continuing in our introductions, and forgive me, Chris, I didn't get a chance to get your name here.
That's okay, Larry.
So we had an illness over at Tendril and had a last change, but I think for the best. So Chris, obviously Tendril has been focused on offering a complete energy services platform. I'm not sure if that's the exact terminology you guys use, but I know that's what the focus has been. Can you tell me a little bit about what the solution means for utilities who are integrating a variety of smart connected assets, and really how this is helping utilities evolve as they present a new set of offerings to the marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just repeating some of that. Sorry if you were hoping to hear Jake speak. He's out sick and taking care of a sick family, so you have me instead. But thank you for the opportunity of speaking with everyone. It's a topic that is front of mind for us at Tendril, and kind of more so every day with how things are changing. So Tendril has been around for over a decade, providing solutions to utilities to really help them in some of their key kind of areas of concern, and anywhere from customer acquisition to customer engagement to lowering cost to serve to increasing customer satisfaction, and really kind of focusing on the customer and helping utilities change the nature of the conversation that they're having with the customer. And it's a fascinating time right now because nothing about the kind of the next 10 years is going to look anything like the last 40 years in this business. And everything is changing so quickly. Consumers are changing, the homes are changing, the things we're putting in them, the customer expectations are changing, and so and conversely, or to support that, the utilities are changing to deliver on those expectations. So it's a really fun and fascinating time to be talking about connected everything. And by the way, there's a whole lot of things I hope never get connected. So while I applaud the vision, hopefully we stop at some logical point of connecting things. But so I think that the area around kind of how do we help utilities kind of get help get them into this new world of connected everything really centers around our approach to the market, and that is this centralized platform that can help utilities start navigating the very changing landscape that's coming right now, that is here now and is only going to get more and more down that path. So the way that the utilities have done this historically is this very kind of siloed programmatic approach. So they're going to run a customer engagement program, or maybe they're going to run a demand response program, and as things like REV become more common and the regulatory landscapes change, the kinds of things utilities are able to do are only going to get more and more diverse, and the kinds of devices that are turning up on the grid, the things that are feeding both directions into and from the grid are only going to increase. And that's fun, but it also produces a huge challenge to that traditional kind of programmatic approach, because you really want to understand anything that's happening in program A, as far as customers or data, you really need to apply in program B and C and D, because you don't want to give one experience to a customer that is then maybe conflicted by a different experience to that same customer. And so the approach that we take is this kind of standardized, flexible, easily integrated platform that helps our utilities both engage customers, lower the cost of serving those customers, but help them navigate this changing landscape as things like solar and storage and smart devices in the home are only increasing. So that's kind of what Tendril does and how we approach the market.
Thanks, Chris. And last but most certainly not least, Kim, wanted to ask you a question about how you guys are working, especially with folks in the C&I space. So I know Blue Pillar may not be a commonly known brand yet amongst utility folks. I know that that's the direction you guys are heading. Can you tell us a little bit about how you guys have worked with critical facilities and how you've worked with various C&I customers and the sorts of value that you guys are providing by connecting a diversity of assets for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bryce. So Blue Pillar is a company that is focused for the last 10 or so years in a specific part of the behind-the-meter services for critical facilities, in particular the healthcare systems, hospitals. So for our last 10 years, we've been focusing on connecting emergency backup power for hospitals that absolutely positively can't lose power. And over the last 5 or so years, we started to see some interesting trends emerge. So many of you may have seen, but there's been a 400% spike in behind-the-meter distributed generation assets over the last 5 years. So all those assets, those distributed generation assets, are now getting deployed behind the meter and are coming online pretty quickly. Recent surveys of facility and energy managers have shown that over 50% are interested in generating their own on-site power, again, behind the meter. So we're starting to see this industry trend change a little bit. We're seeing more complexity now behind the meter, more interest from the C&I facility or energy manager to start to generate their own power, go off-grid, start to take power and resiliency back into their own hands. At the same time, we're also seeing that many are needing to have real-time access to the data, to the energy data that makes their facility tick. So 100% in a recent survey said they did believe that it was important to capture data directly from meters and energy generation assets in real time. However, only 5%, less than 5%, were actually able to get this real-time access to the energy data. And then, taking this other very interesting stat, 79% of organizations polled in a recent Deloitte & Touche study said that they believe, their executive staff believed, that reaching their energy management goals, meaning becoming more efficient or more resilient, 79% believe that this would give their company a competitive advantage. So what Blue Pillar has seen over the last 5 years is moving from emergency backup power systems and connecting those now to connecting a slew of energy management assets is an absolute critical need for the C&I sector. We then, because of that, focused on the connectivity. So we provide an Internet of Things connectivity platform behind the meter to connect all the various assets that the quote-unquote facility of the future may need to reach their goals, whether it be, and we believe the facility of the future, whether it be a hospital or C&I customer, they're really trying to achieve 3 things. They're either, or a multitude of those 3 things, but really they're trying to become more efficient, meaning conserving energy, reducing their consumption, and trying to reduce maybe the cost of their energy spend. Becoming greener, for example, could be another option, become more efficient. They're trying to become more resilient, meaning power outages just aren't an option, so trying to have more connectivity to their emergency backup power, testing, making sure that all emergency systems will work in a power outage to avoid issues for a hospital or a data center. And then finally, becoming more self-sufficient, the 55% surveyed saying, hey, we think that we're going to be going off-grid. We could be deploying a microgrid or bringing on some on-site generation onto our facility. This is what we call the Facility of the Future framework, and our belief is that these are the goals that most of the C&I sector are trying to achieve. So moving beyond the hospital space, what Blue Pillar's done recently is partnered with energy service providers to put together this Facility of the Future framework, which we think is a market engagement model that will help retail energy service providers sell more services behind the meter. And what we're interested in providing is this open network connectivity layer so that any asset that would be required as part of a service for the Facility of the Future is connected in an open, simple, and secure ubiquitous way so that we can reduce some of that complexity behind the meter. Connecting to a generator can be as simple as connecting to a meter or an HVAC control panel. All of that is done simply, securely, and the same way different manufacturers' equipment is able to connect into this behind the meter platform and work seamlessly regardless of how old the legacy asset is, who made that asset, and get them all connected in the same secure way so that you don't have to build individual networks. You don't have to build in security after the fact.
Absolutely.
And I'll hand it back over, Bryce.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. So as I hope everybody can see, we have a diversity of experts coming at this platform for connectivity from a number of angles, as well as a number of different roles within their own companies. So I have a list of moderated questions here, and I certainly can think of others after those introductions, but I just wanted to remind everybody, enter your questions into the chat field. Stefan will be moderating that and making sure that we can integrate those into the discussion as much as possible. So the first one that came to mind for me, and Arun, I'm going to kick this one initially over to you, was something that you had mentioned in your remarks about what's all happening with the smart cities efforts across the globe and here across the country. So how are these connectivity platforms and connectivity applications, how are they feeding into these broader smart cities efforts? And can you talk about some specific deployments that are leveraging these technologies and what it's meaning for the projects that you're seeing out there?
Thanks, Bryce. First of all, I would say the fundamental agreement among the city planners, the city leaders, the utilities who serve those, the water companies who serve those, the municipals who serve those cities, there's a fundamental agreement beginning to shape up in many cities that they need to work more cohesively and not have segregated networks to connect their own silos. So we definitely see that as a trend. There are obviously some shining leaders in this, and there are some who are following them very, very carefully. I would say Envision Charlotte program probably is one of the most well-known, where they are really trying hard to bring the utilities, the municipals, the city together to make one good, connected, beautiful city. Under the same Envision Charlotte program, there was an Envision America program which was set up, and I'm actually pleased to mention that Spokane is chosen as one of the chosen smart city for the future. So we should see some interesting developments come up here as well. So I would say that we have been hearing this terminology of smart cities for, I would say, at least good 6-7 years, maybe more. Finally, we are beginning to see that there is a cohesive mass around it. There is a groundswell in the favor, and more cities are beginning to think about it as not only just cities which are connected today, but really smart communities for tomorrow. Everybody's thinking of what will our kids inherit from us when they move into these cities. We look at our current young generation. They don't really decide to go find a job in a city. They decide first which city they want to live in, and then try to find work there. So the world has changed around us, and I think the utilities are beginning to understand that too, and the city planners are beginning to understand that too.
Joel, from the work that you guys are doing, how is this connectivity taking shape or looking in practice for some of the smart city stuff that you guys are seeing?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think just to piggyback off of what Arun was just saying, I agree completely. I think when you look at successful smart city deployments, right, Charlotte as a really good example, just to add to what he was commenting on, it really, generally speaking, does start with a utility, right? And so if you look at Charlotte and you just use that as a case study, what we did over there as a public-private partnership was to begin working with a utility that allowed us to suss out specific and definable cost savings for the cities in the way of energy reduction in the downtown core. It also allowed us to then extrapolate into the water space and then most recently into the solid waste space, right? And so now you end up with a city that not only do you have a clear and definable understanding about how much energy and water they are using, and then which obviously allows allows the community to bring efficiency into play, right? And it allows the city to pass along practical and actionable ways to save water as well as energy. But it also allows those cost savings to be reallocated and funneled into other, and I'm using air quotes here, other smart deployments, right? So that then as a community, one smart deployment will begin, or IoT deployment will begin to fund the next, which will bring added efficiencies or revenue streams into it, so on and so forth. And I think that at the end of the day, there are a couple pillars. Obviously, the utilities role is one of the most critical ways to begin a smart city or smart community conversations, right? Because the low-hanging fruit is there and very palatable to the majority of the citizens in a community. But then it also allows that initiative to grow and accommodate the needs of the cities, whether it's to attract millennials or whatever the specific goals are. It allows them to define those goals and set definable KPIs for measurement. So I think at the end of the day, communication, free flow of data, as well as deploying the correct sensors are really the key. All of those need to be accomplished in a partnership.
Yeah, thanks. Chris, I wanted to send the next question your direction, and Joel was talking about clearly utilities are a central linchpin for these platforms for bringing in connectivity in marketplaces. So my question was actually around, are they rate-basing these solutions, and yours as well as others in the marketplace? If they aren't, how are they financing it? And then a second part of that is, how are they getting regulators on board with various solutions?
Sure. So I think it's all the above. Certainly some are rate-basing, depends a little bit on the program and the regulatory landscape as to whether they have appetite for it. But I think more and more, especially with things like REV, that will be less and less true. That if the utility can figure out ways of providing real value to the customers, obviously above and beyond the commodity services, and they can solve real problems of their own as far as doing things like lowering their cost to serve those customers, creating more predictability around energy costs, doing that really, really well to a point where they can even do fixed bill and things like that, then less and less of that will need to be rate-based. So right now, in REV, as a great example, they're trying to loosen up a little bit of the reins and saying, all right, here are the high-level things you have to achieve. You have to have ubiquitous, redundant, and reliable service, but how you make money along the way is kind of up to you. And so we're already seeing ways of changes in those areas that allow them to be more creative with how they make money as far as using that relationship they've built with customers to provide new products and services, get into solar, get into storage, get into other connected devices, and becoming more of a energy product and service provider rather than just a commodity provider. And the more that becomes true, the less they will have to rate base.
Varun, on your end, same question. How are utilities financing this, and how are they bringing regulators on board to kind of get them behind these solutions?
I think Chris makes an interesting point here. We are beginning to see, actually, as he pointed out, an interesting market shift where regulators are obviously well informed about these and are encouraging these, but in certain markets around the world, we see almost a trend where the energy service provider companies are beginning to take shape, and companies who may want to offer even connectivity as a service. All these various assets, which are disparate assets owned by disparate companies, are are connected via a network, but who gets an access to data on these and who gets to talk to which device is really dependent upon who owns those. And really, connectivity is becoming an interesting option as a service rather than as something which needs to be passed through the rate cases. And I think that's something which even the utilities here in Northwest should start looking at, and I'm sure regulators are looking at that too. I'll give you just one example here, which is a little land far, far away, but if you look at Australia, Australia is an interesting example where I think if the statistics, if I'm reading them right, like 19% of the homes now have some kind of a self-generation, either solar or something else, and it is increasing at 100% every year. So utilities there are beginning to see that there is a need of an energy services company to help connect all these kind of assets and provide information in a common way. So I won't be surprised if we see these trends come up here as well. The whole idea of different companies offering connectivity as a service and then data flow as a service, similar to what I think Kim was also mentioning earlier.
Yeah, Kim, I guess I'll kick the floor over to you. I mean, the connectivity as a service, companies as a service platform, how is that interfacing with the stuff you guys are seeing and the role that these energy service providers are playing as they interface with their, C&I customers? Maybe you went on mute, Kim. Okay. Well, maybe.
Am I coming back through? Sorry, I was unmuted. Perfect. Yeah, no, I completely agree with Arun. We're seeing that the need for ubiquitous connectivity and making that as simple as possible and as secure as possible is absolutely creating opportunities for managed services, and how that could play out in a variety of different ways. But behind the meter as a service, energy service providers stepping in and offering different service models, and as well, we within Blue Pillar, we actually provide our platform as a service from the perspective that we keep the network that we're connecting all these various assets behind the meter. It's basically a distributed SCADA network. We need to make sure that that network is running 24/7, that the data is always coming out of the asset 24/7, that the data is getting where the data needs to go, whether it's to one of our systems, one of our partner systems, or perhaps to the cloud for predictive analytics or some next generation sort of algorithm or service that another provider could be running. So we absolutely see it going in that direction, because at the end of the day, the C&I customer or the retail energy service provider, they want to make sure that everything that they've put behind the meter is going to work as well on day one as it does, 5 years down the road, and that there are no stranded assets, there's no lost data, and all of our business models are going to be dependent on this data. So without it, the whole thing collapses. So absolutely, we see this definitely moving in as a service.
One of the things that's interesting to me, to see evolving in the marketplace is how the value stream or the benefits from this, these connectivity applications are being dispersed. So whether they're operational benefits for utilities or there are other savings benefits for users. I wanted to ask, the panel here, if we could dive a little bit on the end user side, so maybe businesses or even residential, homeowners. And maybe I'll start with you still, Kim, but how are these platforms for connecting smart assets, how are they benefiting the end user?
So from the end user's perspective, it's kind of like that facility of the future model that I showed in one of my slides. The end user is really most interested in making sure that they're benefiting from energy efficiency services, that they're getting resilient power, and that if they need to generate their own power or become more self-sufficient, they can. But the other piece to all this, and it's what a lot of the panelists are kind of alluding to and talking to today, is that this only works if the communications infrastructure is there, that it's secure, that these sensors are, everything's working. So we need to make sure that under the covers that everything that takes, you know, the generator to talk to the switch, to send data back to our system, and also grab data from a meter or, you know, energy storage, we need to make sure that all of that can be ubiquitously connected, that security is built in, and that they're reduce the amount of customized, in our case, SCADA development. So when we're trying to connect all these assets, what some may not know is that behind the meter, to get all this connected, we're basically building a distributed SCADA model. So if you're able to reduce the amount of customized programming, make it as simple and out of the box and secure and self-configurable, that's really our goal. And I think it will benefit the end user because they will have reduced time to market. They'll be able to reduce their spend. They'll be able to scale beyond asset fleets and buildings, so they won't stop at just one building. They'll be able to connect a bunch of buildings or connect a bunch of distributed generation fleets. So some of those things that we're talking about that are just the overall benefit of an IoT platform working well, I think are some of the things that will benefit end users the most.
Chris,
Yeah.
you know, from that standpoint, how are end users benefiting from these things?
Yeah, I was going to take a little bit of the contrarian view. I think to date they're not. I think, you know, we've done a lot. We as the industry have done a lot. We've put smart meters in homes and you know, talked about consumer benefits, but I don't think we've realized consumer benefits. And I think if you interviewed the average consumer, they wouldn't say that smart meter on their home is somehow solving a problem for them. I think it's solving a lot of utility problems, and that's good, that has value, but I don't think we have done a lot to solve consumer problems. And that needs to change. I think it is changing. Flexibility, you know, optionality is changing. But, you know, if you look at kind of what has happened with the taxi cab industry, with Uber, that has changed almost overnight. And it changed because you had this kind of slow-moving, not consumer-focused industry that Uber realized, you know, is ripe for change, went in, created a consumer-centric approach that solved the problems that consumers were facing and changed the industry almost overnight. And I think that's how we need to be thinking. We have historically, you know, we talked about smart assets and we're putting smart things in homes, but most of that has been to solve operational issues for those supplying the energy and understanding where outages are, understanding how, you know, solving billing problems. And I think that we need to get to a point where we are focusing more on the user's needs, and I think we're kind of getting there. But things like, you know, even traditional demand response, you know, demand response, you know, isn't a consumer-focused solution. It's shutting things off where, you know, when consumers need them the most in the hottest times of the day, and that certainly is not solving a consumer problem. Now, there are, you know, I think the technology is changing to the point, and consumer demand has changed to the point where we now have to, and we are. So, you know, utilities in the regulatory landscape that will, you know, change in order to allow them to do that. You know, allowing them to get into storage, allowing them to get into solar, giving them more optionality around smart devices and bring your own device, and all of that is absolutely the way that we need to be thinking as an industry. But I got to say, to date, you know, that's a fairly new way of thinking and a new kind of change coming to our industry. But to date, that's not really how we have thought.
And Arun, to kick it over to you, is it going to take regulatory pressure such that the consumers are thought more of on the onset with these deployments, or is this just the direction that the industry is maybe more naturally heading?
Two points I want to make. I would agree that with Chris that we haven't really hit where it is touching the consumers the most yet, but I think, as I've said earlier, the technology is in place, the groundswell is in the favor of making this happen. I think the audience which we need to attract, or the communities need to attract, are already in place. So I think this thing is going to happen and explode very rapidly. To your point about whether regulators need to push this, there are obviously some interesting regulatory hurdles which need to be crossed. You know, regulators need to be open to the idea of connectivity as a service, and allowing utilities benefit of offering connectivity as a service to not only themselves but also to the other participants on this grid. That can definitely help provide much better information, as Kim was mentioning, about the very simple information of how much solar energy you are generating as compared to how much you're getting from your utility is not an intuitive information which comes easily out from a system. So allowing these kind of capabilities for these things to have good connectivity and exchange of information can really benefit from some regulatory support as well.
Thank you. Well, we are tracking along in our session, so I wanted to give a virtual round of applause to Arun, Kim, Chris, and Joel for getting this conversation going. Feel welcome if you're able to stick around as we continue our dialogue. I feel like the topic we're at now is the perfect place, and we're also at the time to go to the second panel. So Arun, Kim, Joel, and Chris, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we continue the conversation, I think we're at the perfect place in the dialogue to dive into the second part, which really is around those responsive and intelligent applications that are living on-premise with users, to talk about, well, how are these benefiting the system, both the end users themselves as well as the grid operators. So as we dive into part two here, wanted to introduce Karen Butterfield at STEM, as well as John Casadonte at Cree, Ian Doebber with Transformative Wave, and Jeff Gleason with Nest. So thank you guys all for being a part of the second part of our discussion here. Just to go back to that slide that I introduced at the very beginning, that 21st century modernized infrastructure system has a variety of players here that are closer to the edge that are bringing on these connectivity resources. So as I had introduced all of our speakers, Nest with their smart thermostats, Cree with the connected lighting, Transformative Wave with the smart and connected rooftop HVAC systems, and STEM with the intelligently dispatched energy storage applications. And there are others, but I think we have a very strong representation amongst this audience. So here we can actually see where these assets are physically lying a little bit more easily than our previous panel. So of course you've got the Nest thermostat sitting there in the home, controlling HVAC and building in other connected applications with their Connect with Cree solution or Connect with Nest solution. You've of course got the smart lighting that Cree is offering, and this house didn't have a garage, but STEM with their storage solution, and as well what these might look like on a commercial application. So we're going to be talking about responsive and intelligent applications, both from an end user standpoint at the residence as well as at the business. So we'll be kind of going back and forth between the two. Jeff, let me just make sure I've got your audio there. Are you online with us here? And unmuted? All right, I might come back to Jeff if we don't have him on in a second. I know I've got Ian. Ian, are you there and unmuted and ready to roll?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So Ian, I think I'll kick the first question over to you. Transformative Wave, which may not be a brand that many on the phone know, but hopefully more will soon. You guys are bringing the small, medium businesses kind of into the connected world, if you will, with the retro solution that you guys have for rooftop HVAC systems. So the question I wanted to ask for you initially was, how are you using the connectivity that you guys are bringing for that system to provide additional value to your customers who are businesses, and how does that value also work for the grid operators?
Sure. And do you mind, Bryce, I'm not sure what's showing up, going back to slide 22, kind of gives a visual of kind of where we play in the space.
The business one. Sure.
Yeah. So, hello everyone. Everything Doebber with Transformative Wave. So the space we play in are those metal boxes you see on the roofs, and you kind of see everywhere you go. They're low-cost HVAC systems that are typically put on small to medium-sized commercial buildings. So where we start with is the customer side. So we use the bundling business approach where we leverage the energy efficiency savings to pay for the connectivity piece. So, and then once we have that energy savings, we link up with our, connected solution, the IQ, to provide multiple value streams. So we start feeding these different values into the customer, and layering on top of the energy savings. So first and foremost, the connectivity provides the capability to quantify those savings. So complete transparency that the system is working as it's supposed to. Second, it gives our customers real-time control and oversight. So intuitive graphical tool and analytics. And lastly, it provides clients with a lot of non-energy benefits. So this is fault detection diagnostics, reduced service expenses, and longer equipment life. So these capabilities are particularly powerful when applied across large portfolios. Now, regarding the Internet of Things and benefiting the grid, we are definitely starting to see a lot of additional value streams come into the picture, benefiting the customers as well. So we kind of categorize these as first, load curtailment, so demand response, for ancillary services and other type of services. Energy arbitrage in certain rate structures, so where there's time of use rate or peak demand pricing, and then eventually we see the transactive energy as kind of being a part of our solution in the future. So we're definitely excited about all of these options and features coming down the pipe through the IoT that can benefit both the customer from a return on investment payback, but also also the grid as well. So
thanks, Ian. You guys are doing some amazing things with those HVAC systems, so look forward to coming back around and discussing some of the things you guys are seeing in the market. Karen, I'm going to hand the floor over to you next. I think probably most of us on the call do recognize STEM, hopefully, and you guys are certainly revolutionizing the way that energy storage is being brought to the market. Can you tell us a little bit about how you guys are optimizing the value streams from those energy storage systems and how you're bringing that to the market, and really talk a little bit about who is benefiting from those value streams, be them the end users and the grid operators and others?
Sure, and thank you very much. I would say that STEM optimizes systems and we stack value streams. And our stakeholders are primarily commercial, industrial, and government customers, including distribution utilities, ISOs, and I'd probably pile on the regulators as well, both PUC type regulators and even at the federal level. So that's the ecosystem that we work within. How the STEM system works is we install a battery bank, a small locker size full of lithium-ion batteries, and then we control those batteries using software and predictive analytics. So we take a real-time signal, or a 1 second roughly signal from the battery and from the building, and then using an econometric model, the tariff structure that the customer's on, the time of day, year, weather, we determine when to charge and discharge that battery based on those economics. A lot of times those economics are based on demand charges for the customer. We're actually chasing peaks and then discharging against those peaks to lower the customer bill. But oftentimes, in terms of stacking these value streams, we're also aggregating the battery capacity. So if you have 10,000 battery banks out there, you can then determine exactly what your capacity is at any given point in time, and then you can provide that to the grid, either through market structures or through bilateral contracts with distribution utilities or ISOs. And the utility can control the resource themselves, or they can just set a price signal, and we can dispatch that energy or even charge our batteries at a time when, in theory, there would be negative pricing in the market from the belly of the duck, so to speak. And we provide these services to customers in a financing mode so that they don't have to take technology risk, and then the utility doesn't have to take the technology risk, and a portion of the cost is paid by the commercial customer, and they're getting value, and a portion of the cost is paid by the utility or the ISO in the form of a market signal. And I'll leave it at that and take questions as they come.
Excellent. Thank you, Karen. John, just want to make sure I've got you here and got your audio live. Are you online?
I am, Bryce, thanks.
Excellent. Great. Well, John, I found my way into the smart lighting section that was front and center inside the front doors at Home Depot a few months back, and was delighted to see that the price for a connected Cree light had come down under 20 bucks. So I think my initial question to you is, are we going to see connected lighting come on like we saw, the non-connected version of the LED lights that you guys kind of led into the marketplace a few years back?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having us on, Bryce, and it's a good question, and I think that for many of us that are somewhat on the techie side of things and understand the value set that it could bring to somebody that has the knowledge of using some type of connected configuration inside a residential home, or whether it's at a commercial application, there's endless amount of opportunities to leverage it. But I would say that the one factor that is preventing some really rapid success with it is just the standardization and just the definition of the communications between devices. And you'll probably recognize that many of us, we've introduced our capability sets in various forms using certain types of devices in order for that to make it happen. So that's a little bit of a challenge that we have to make sure that the industry ties together and moves forward, especially on the residential side, because there's not really any set standard that is taking over one way or the other. Many of you, I'm sure many of my peers here that are speaking today probably work with devices that are maybe Zigbee based. There's other communication paths that can be used as well. So technology-wise, it has the opportunity to really grow really fast, but from an adoption and from just a standardization point of view, that might be just the overall challenge. Things are a little bit different, though, on the commercial side of the business. The commercial industry is largely standardized on various forms of controls that can be leveraged with smart lighting, and things like 0 to 10 volt control systems are pretty prevalent within the industry. And many of us have started introducing other capabilities that either are wireless based or in some cases are power over Ethernet based. And all these technology capabilities that are being introduced are largely there because they can leverage solid state lighting. The LED itself is such a remarkable device. It can do a lot of great things from an imagery point of view, generating the proper amount of light, generating cool to warm light, but it's also extremely reactive to control systems. So turning on a light instantaneously when it's outside, that could be used in conjunction with security systems, is one of those examples. Inside, you can maximize energy efficiency. It's funny because, like, in this day and age, when we talk about LED lighting, I think we're beyond just having to talk about energy efficiency, and now we all are forced to talk a lot about what advantages can be brought to the table when you're considering implementing solid state lighting within a structure, whether it's your house or whether it's in a commercial environment. So yeah, things are rapidly moving. From last year to this year, there are probably 50% greater efficiencies that have been introduced in the LED world, and more applications that we're seeing applied, especially on the commercial side, outside of just the security analogy that I offered earlier, are just becoming so much more of a popular topic for us.
Thank you, John. I really was interested in your comment around, moving beyond the value proposition from an efficiency standpoint. And I know that's a key thing at the Transformative Wave side of the equation as well. So I think I'll send this first question to you, John. When you communicate the value of these products to the marketplace, how are you communicating the connected aspects to your clients or to the possible clients? Is it something that they're searching out for, or are you guys having to educate them around these new sets of benefits?
It's a little bit of both the push and pull, Bryce, and I'll give you an example. There are large companies, Cisco as an example, that when they put a stake in the ground and call out things like high-performance buildings, intelligent ceilings that draw attention, especially in the commercial space, that is a big plus for us. As a lighting company, all of us in the lighting world, our primary goals were to deliver a good high-quality light, whether we're talking about incumbent technologies or LED technologies. But it's becoming rapidly apparent that there are all kinds of value sets that can be introduced at the same time that you're bringing an LED light in. Let me give you an example. Probably first and foremost, when you're looking at integration with building management systems that could offer the capability of, let's say, you have a light that is on in a conference room that may be unoccupied. Perhaps that light can do something more, like identify whether there is any occupancy in that room, and if it's not occupied, it can not only turn itself off, but also it can send a message to the HVAC system to reduce or cut off the heating or air conditioning that might be associated with that particular space. And it goes even beyond that. You can now set up situations where you can maximize efficiency of electricity coming into the building by just only turning on lights in certain areas that you know are going to be populated. Some of them this might all seem pretty logical, but if you walk into a commercial space, many of the individuals, facility managers, the CFOs that are controlling the spend, really the first and foremost thing that they're looking for is making sure that the lights work properly. The second thing they're looking for is high efficiency, and then other value statements. So we are bringing in the conversation a little bit ahead of what their expectations are, and they are starting to react and look at the opportunity to do more than just reducing energy efficiency in their buildings.
Ian, I'll kick the question over to you. I know it's somewhat of a similar role where you guys are leading kind of with the efficiency value proposition and then doing a lot more with the connectivity. But how is that connectivity component? How are you needing to educate your customer base as you roll that out?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is coming to the client with knowing where their pain points are, whatever shape or form that is, and so that can be sometimes energy related, or oftentimes is, but it also can be non-energy related. So doing our research beforehand on the customer side, what are they looking for in terms of the connected solution? We're finding actually a lot more of our customers are being more excited about the ability to have oversight and control of their resources. But then, once we have that relationship established, really getting back to your question is to feed them, educate them on the possibilities of these other revenue streams that connectivity can enable them, particularly when it comes to, the smart grid. So this would be letting them know that there's other different tariff structures out there. We're actually working with a gym facility with large portfolio in California, and educating them that there's other tariff structures out there that would benefit them, where we can leverage the kind of flexi watts of our system to use more energy in the morning as opposed to the afternoon when the price of electricity is higher, and actually 50 to 60% of the monthly savings is more on the peak demand, peak pricing side than it is on just the energy kWh. So I think the important thing for us is we get our foot in the door with the energy savings and some of the, higher level connectivity that the customer can understand, intuitively, like the maintenance savings and oversight, and then start, as that relationship develops, feed in other benefits that can be for the customer, and therefore, benefit the grid as well.
And Karen, a somewhat similar question to you, but I'm going to ask it in a slightly different way. I know demand charges and kind of the peaky extreme pricing for certain customer bases is kind of at the top of the value stack for bringing in an intelligent storage system. But can you tell me, share a little bit the value streams that customers really are looking for with the energy storage solutions that you guys are providing, and as well what you guys might be educating the market on that they really should be looking more to with these solutions? Karen, you might be on mute.
Sorry about that, I was. First and foremost, customers want to save energy. They want to save money, really, and they want more control over their monthly bills. And so we provide them with some of that through, it could be either demand charge reduction, or it could be even energy arbitrage if the time of day pricing has enough of a spread. But the other value streams that are really grid value streams include voltage support, capacity, specifically local capacity, market participation in the Cal ISO, and even in Hawaii we're doing ramping support because of the renewables that are coming on in the morning and going off in the afternoon. But all of these value streams can be monetized through the structure, the network of batteries that we have out there, and they need to be monetized by either a market signal or a price or a contract, and all of those streams can be monetized for the benefit of the customer. So our sophisticated customers, enterprise customers, they understand that, and they understand that they can do a certain amount of peak shaving or a certain amount of, even manual demand response if they want to turn the service elevator off, because now they know that, this is their peak. But we can also monetize the other value streams and share them with the customers.
So one of the questions I wanted to dive into with you all was really around kind of linking the connection between this session and the session that preceded. How important is it that your application kind of seamlessly integrates with other solutions and interfaces with those, those platform layer elements of connectivity? So I wanted to kick that over to you first, John, and then Ian or Karen, you're welcome to comment. And I know we have some of the panelists from the first session, so I might wrap them in on this question as well.
Yeah, so I think it actually is there's a really good synergy between the first half of the conversation and what we're discussing now. So, you think about lighting as being, you take it for granted in a lot of cases. It's really a mission critical operation within buildings, and for the most part, if you don't have light during the work hours, you're not going to get probably as much productivity out of your employees or whatever experiences you have as your residential. If it's nighttime, you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. So we take it for granted, but it is pretty much important in every aspect of our day. There's 12 hours of darkness, 12 hours of daylight. Now, how it applies to the connection between our discussions is that, delivering the power to the source, and it could be the home or the commercial side of the business, is critical, obviously, but then managing how much of that is actually being used is really important. And, going back or reflecting back on some of the statements I made earlier about solid state lighting, not only are you getting a pretty heavy reduction just right off the bat when you replace your lighting, your incumbent technologies with an LED light, but you have so much more of an opportunity to do massive manipulation of how that operates, whether it turns on and off on a certain time of day, whether it turns off because of occupancy, vacancy modes, whether it does automatic dimming because there's lights coming out of the from the windows or lights coming into the windows from outside of the building. It's all relative to how much power is being consumed by that entity, again, residential or from a commercial space. So when the delivery has to be metered a certain way, whether it's the demand response system that has to cut back, you're really already prepared to do that pretty effectively when you've converted a building over to technology, newer technology. So, you know, there are many different mechanisms that are being used in these discussions that we've had today to help reduce the amount of energy being consumed or being a little bit more intelligent on how it's being managed is all going to connect together. And what it means is a pretty big statement environmentally, where you don't have to have power companies producing more and more maybe coal burning plants or nuclear plants, or just expanding in terms of wind. There's so many other possibilities that now come into play that are going to benefit us all in the long run.
Aaron or Ian, would you guys care to comment on like how the topic of how important it is for these various things working synergistically together?
Yeah, this is Ian. I think, you know, because we're a retrofit solution, so we come in and we have to, you know, automatically, seamlessly integrate with what's already there on site, and the client can already have a, you know, building automation there on site. We inherently are in a kind of very flexible solution. So, you know, we've taken that kind of baseline and then applied it to this next phase in our, you know, in the future for us with the grid piece, where integrating with utility providers, maybe even others, in terms of how the information is coming to us from a, you know, a grid signal to curtail or to increase load. You know, we remain flexible because, you know, because we have to. So I think you know, a key piece of that flexibility is, I guess, two aspects. First is kind of these open, you know, using open standards. We've seen, you know, a lot of benefit with that, where this, you know, let's say open ADR, for instance, it is a very well-defined specification. And, you know, when two parties come to the table, you know, us and a utility provider or an aggregator, we're able to kind of hit the ground running because there's, you know, the conversation is based on this published standard. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is, you know, the vocabulary. So we're finding ourselves being somewhat kind of a glue between different siloed groups. And fortunately, those walls are starting to be taken down. But what I mean by that is being able to you know, one phone call in the morning, you're talking to a, you know, a utility provider and talking their language about, you know, the benefits that they want, you know, out of certain projects, and then, you know, the next call an hour later talking to the customer in their language. So there's a lot of you know, communication barriers that you know, we run into, but those are slowly starting to be you know, be mitigated with, you know, this whole movement.
Jeff, I think we have you online now. How important is this topic of all these various connected and smart applications, you know, kind of seamlessly working together? Was wondering if we could get your thoughts on that topic as well.
Yeah, and really quickly, my apologies to everyone for joining late. I've had, as luck would have it, massive Wi-Fi issues, even though Bryce was good enough to have us all test this a few weeks ago. So I apologize for that, but glad to be here now. So it's a really important topic, and there's a lot of different takes on that particular issue of sort of responsiveness and growth. And I think one thing from our perspective at Nest that's most important is that 5 years ago Nest didn't exist, and now here we are with a lot of thermostat capacity and demand response. So interesting to see how consumers will continue to purchase new connected products over time. And over the next 5 years, we see a lot of growth in just a lot more connected stuff. And if we make it simple for customers to enroll in programs and very easily engage in the energy conversation, we think that's going to be a big benefit. But if we make it really hard, and if the responsiveness is, if you have to sign up every individual product into 5 different programs, that creates a big barrier, and the adoption funnel is just kind of gets stuck. And then in terms of the devices themselves, responsiveness is critical, because we're now hearing from utilities that sometimes we need demand response for 30 minutes, and sometimes we need it for 4 hours. Sometimes we need it in the northwest region of our service area, and other times we need it in one particular neighborhood. So responsiveness of the device itself, but then also geographic responsiveness has been really, really critical for our utility partners, and so that's something that we're looking a lot more at, which is nice when you then have something that's adopted by customers sort of en masse throughout a service area. You can really target all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So if folks have questions, we're wrapping up in about 15 minutes here. You're welcome to type them in, and we'll continue to integrate them. Karen, I wanted to kick a question to you, maybe diving a little bit into the weeds, but around tariff structures. So how important is the development of new pricing models and tariffs for end users? How important is that for the proliferation of and success of this space? Is it predicated on the fact that there's significant differing prices, or can we work well and get good value out of these applications in the current market structures?
Great question. We view tariff structures as a price signal, and therefore it's important. And there are many different kinds of price signals. Some of them are very effective, and others are not so effective. Some of them are legacy structures that utilities designed and implemented, years and years ago, even before renewable energy and other distributed energy resources came online. And those legacy structures, and many of them are limiting what utilities can do now. We still in California here, we have a high midday TOU rate for residential customers, and sometimes we have negative wholesale pricing at that exact same time, and the utility is hamstrung by rate designs that have to go through regulatory approval and so on. So I think commercial tariffs are a little bit more straightforward. Most of them are based upon a combination of energy charges and demand charges. In some cases, demand charges are now exceeding energy charges, and that does happen to be the right format for a STEM solution, a battery storage solution. And the gentleman who just spoke talked about the changes that are happening on the curve, and those, having a highly responsive system, whether it's a building curve and a building, and a customer needing load, or generating load from distributed resources. Battery storage can handle that, and either price signals via a tariff or price signals via a market structure are going to be needed for us to know when to charge and discharge this resource.
Absolutely. Anybody else on the panel care to comment on the tariff structure importance?
Hi, this is Chris Black from the first panel. So certainly, I think we see them as important for consumer adoption at times. Now, it's not the only thing that's going to drive consumer adoption, but for big ticket items like a solar system on your roof, they certainly have. They may represent more of a the threat of taking them away might serve more of a purpose of driving consumer adoption than having them. I don't know, but certainly we saw that with the solar ITCs, and looking at expiring, it really had a dramatic effect on consumer behavior. And so I think for certain things, the kind of creative rates and creative incentives are important for consumer adoption. They're certainly important for certain technological needs, like Karen was just explaining. But I think this, where we are headed, the path we're on as far as kind of changing consumer sentiment and demand is going to continue whether there are incentives or not.
And if I could add really quickly, this is Jeff from Nest. I think it's really important to consider the role of tariffs and the reaction that residential customers in particular would have. One interesting stat, and I think I've heard Chris mention something similar to this, that is something on the order of like 40 to 60% of customers in California already believe that they're on a time of use rate, and it's actually something like 4% are. And so the reality is customers already think that they're operating in a new tariff structure, and if we try to make a big change in a place like California or in the Pacific Northwest or in Texas or wherever it might be, to something that they don't understand, you're going to have some challenges. And so it's really important, I think, to think of this from a lens of the consumer perspective, in addition to the utility regulatory angle, because it is very easy to assume that customers will just get this stuff and sort of understand how to deal with it.
So I've got one last question that, to the extent people want to go round robin, that would be great. And anybody from the first panel that's still on is welcome to chime in as well. So being that Smart Grid Northwest is focused here in the region, my question was, what market dynamics would be in play here and things that we should look at impacting to really allow for these connected, responsive assets to be more of a true asset in the region. So Ian, you're the person on this panel who sits in the Northwest, so I think I'll start with you and then we can go around.
Sure. Yeah, and I kind of morphing into the last question too. I think, it kind of comes down into a playbook. What fits well based on the demographic. Now I'm speaking from for commercial buildings perspective, and I guess that applies to residential. But in terms of the benefits to the grid, whether that's permanent load reduction during certain times, or smart where loads are actually responding to signals. We see it depends on the building type. So we play often in the small building space. So buildings under 50,000 square feet, which are typically not part of these conversations. They're usually, unless it's part of a large portfolio, national chain. These buildings typically, have been kind of left by the wayside for the smart grid conversation. But they make up over 40% of the square footage, and that and even more so for the Pacific Northwest region. So those particular building types, the space that we play, there is a role that demand response plays. But we did a demonstration with Bonneville Power past couple years where we tested out different DR strategies. Short duration, 20-minute, all the way up to over 4 hours. Different times of the day, winter and summer, and the information we were seeing coming back was, one of the main points was this noise to signal ratio. In these smaller buildings, human behavior can have a dramatic effect on the day-to-day power profile of the building. So being able to measure a demand responsive and a curtailment, with a high level of confidence becomes pretty difficult. So, again, going back to the playbook, I think, depending on the building type, the building demographic in a region, I think where the smart grid can be effective is, deciding to use tariffs or, time of use rates or peak pricing to go after those, smaller buildings, where it would be hard to measure curtailment, and then, do more like ADR, demand signals, or, going to, buildings where it's a lot easier to actually quantify some level of curtailment.
So Jeff or Karen or John, any other feedback from you on, what's happening specific and relative to the market here in the Northwest that could help open up this
Sure, yeah, I can go. This is Jeff from Nest. I would say that there's two things that I've found pretty interesting in the region. First is from a residential energy program perspective, I think really important to combine the efficiency and the demand response conversations, because I know that Pacific Northwest is generally long on power, at least for the next few years, and as a result, energy efficiency might have more of a value proposition than demand response in some pockets. So I think really important to combine those two when you're talking to customers. It should be, what kind of one program voice. And a good example of that is Energy Trust of Oregon and Portland General working together to craft messaging to drive adoption of these technologies. So that's, I think, a good case study there in the Portland area. So I would say that the integrated demand-side management piece is important to combine those value props when, until we get to a point where demand response, at least at the residential level, is really, really economically viable. And the other thing I would say is really interesting to look at the connected product infrastructure, particularly related to water heaters, hot water heaters, and how a big ecosystem of products, whether it's a Nest thermostat talking to a water heater, or an electric vehicle charger talking to a water heater, or vice versa, or all three of those talking together, looking at those end uses in the region that are particularly impactful, like hot water heating, is going to be really important over the next few years.
I'll just top it off with regulatory policy. Long-term stable regulatory policy will help invite companies like ours into the region. And when you look at all of the benefits of distributed storage, the Rocky Mountain Institute report with the bullseye target, if a regulator, a distribution utility, or RTO stacks those benefits and really looks ahead. So one of the things that happened here in Southern California was the San Onofre nuclear generating station that was taken offline, and it created a local capacity problem. And then the utility, Southern California Edison, went out to bid, and now we're in this, years to build out and years to be able to deliver the capacity there. We have another problem that's developing in Southern California with the Aliso Canyon gas leak and the ability of the peaker plants to deliver this summer capacity, this year and next year. And without planning ahead and thinking about what resources do we want in place and how do we value those resources and what kind of policy structures do we want to implement, those resources, those alternative resources, won't be available. And so I'd advise, some effort in that front.
Great. Joel or Chris or anybody who's still around from the first panel, any other recommendations on how to continue to move this market forward in the region?
Yeah, this is Joel. So I just wanted to add on to what Jeff was saying too, specifically, and I think it's more of a frame of mind, right? As we look to develop and implement and deploy more and more sensors, whether they're connected to water heaters or what have you, I would certainly encourage our utility brothers and sisters to look at this as a dualistic deployment strategy, right? Certainly we are trying to increase efficiencies inside of our own business by stretching out our load until the next hour, so on and so forth, right? All of those types of things that we're doing. But then I would also encourage you to look at the deployment of sensors as a revenue opportunity as well, right? Passing on the data to our customer base is something valuable, and it's something that most customers in some form or fashion are willing to pay for, right? So certainly look at it as a couple different opportunities. When you look at what cities and successful deployments around the globe have done from an IoT perspective, when they take data that's being gathered by a variety of sensors out in the field, and they present it usually in one of three ways: just simply providing the data, comparing where you're at to where some of your neighbors historically are at, and then also kind of the newest edification is to gamify or create some kind of a competition centric around the data that's being provided, right? But when you take data and you provide it to your customers, it enables them to make the right decisions, which enables change. So certainly from a revenue standpoint, look at it from a operational efficiency perspective, as well as what it can do from a revenue increase.
Joel?
Yeah.
Well, we're at that time, so I'm going to cut us off. We've had a very interesting discussion. Thank you to all the speakers from both sessions. We may well continue this conversation because of all of the interesting things happening around this topic. So as Stefan had mentioned at the onset, we would invite everybody to our Transactive Energy Systems Conference. I should have put a slide in here on it. That's May 17th to 19th in Portland. We can certainly send attendees a link to see if they want to check out more. One last thing as we wrap up, I just wanted everybody to know that our good friends at Cree were able to find in the highly coveted demand, in the high demand backlog there, some connected LEDs. So we will find some way to randomly select attendees from today's session and get you in touch with John's colleagues there at Cree so you can have one of those. Thanks again to everybody for joining the session. Don't hesitate to contact Smart Grid Northwest or give me an email or a call if you have any questions on this topic. But we will hopefully be on another session sometime later this year on a similar topic. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
If